got stuff that means nothing to everybody else but means a lot to you? Yeah. My parents do, and they're expecting me to deal with all of it when they die. My family's way of dealing with stuff we don't want anymore is to borrow somebody's excavator and dig a big hole. I try not to do that to my kids and have a lot of stuff that doesn't mean anything to them that they're going to have to deal with. But this is one of those things that they're going to have to deal with. This is my granny's lemonade pitcher. Okay? Sometimes she put tea in it. It was kind of when she did that, we had to talk to her and like, this is for lemonade? Like you don't, not really. But this pitcher right here makes me think of my granny because every time I would go over there, this is what she would have out. And I can see her because she would never let us get it ourselves, right? She wanted to pour our drinks for us. She didn't fix our plates, but she would pour our drinks for us. And so when she died, I wanted this. And there's a problem with this in that there is a crack right here in the handle. It drives me crazy because I want to use it. Like I want this in the refrigerator. I don't like having stuff to look at. I want something I can use, but this has a crack in it, and I know that this handle is just going to break off. So right now, it sits up on the top shelf in our cabinet to be there. And it means a lot to me because I look at this and I see her, like I'm touching where her hands touched. And she would make lemonade in this, and it wasn't particularly great lemonade. It wasn't like it was fresh. She was using the canned frozen lemonade. I don't know if they still make that anymore, but this is what she would use to make this. But it means a lot to me. It means absolutely nothing to my kids. Nothing. And that's okay, right? Because Quinn was, I don't even know if Beckham had been born before she died. Like they were very young. And they remember her vaguely. They remember the idea of her, but they don't have a relationship with her. And so let me tell you what's going to happen with this. This is going to sit in the top of our cabinet, and whenever we move to another house, it's going to ride in the front seat, and it's going to be wrapped up, and it's going to be taken really good care of until I die. And then after I die, the children are going to discuss who has to take it. And the boys will say, I don't want that. There's a possibility Quinn will keep it because she's a pack rat, and she just keeps everything. But she probably won't keep it, and it'll just be thrown out because it's broken. You can't resell this. And if she does keep it, then that's the last generation, right? Because her kids are going to look at this like, what is this broken thing? Why did mom keep all this junk? And they'll throw it away. And so this thing that means a ton to me, it's like a connection to the past, doesn't mean anything to anybody else, will be tossed. And that's okay. Because it's my relationship, it's my connection. And when I'm gone, it doesn't matter. Now, there is a way that I could preserve that relationship for them, and I could make it something that continued on. See, if I was able to find somebody that fixes cheap pitchers to fix the glass so that it wouldn't work out, so that it wouldn't mess up, I could use this. And I could tell the story of my grandmother, and I could tell them stories about her, and every time we poured this, I could make it a ritual. And through my relationship with her and with them, I could bridge that gap, and we could make it a family heirloom. I could do that. But because it's broken, I can't do that. It's just a piece of glass with my memories attached to it that will mean nothing to anybody else. You probably got stuff like that. Now, the problem is not the pitcher. The problem is that there are things that have meaning beyond just our personal relationship with them that are supposed to be passed down to generation to generation to generation. And when we don't do a good job passing those down, connecting that relationship for them, then we lose something valuable. We don't just lose a lemonade pitcher. We lose something valuable. And in Mark chapter 14, Jesus gives us a lemonade pitcher. He gives us a ceremony that we're supposed to follow. We're supposed to teach our children about. We're supposed to echo through the generations so that every generation can put their hands on it and say, no matter how far separated I am in time and distance from those first disciples, I can put my hands on it, and we're all touching the same thing. We're all connected back to that. The problem is we have done a bad job. And this thing that's supposed to be our lemonade pitcher that connects us back through time and space has become something we do that some people care about and some people don't care about. And the people that do care about, maybe they don't even understand why it matters. It's just something we do. And that thing is, we call it the Lord's Supper. Now, if you're from other backgrounds, you may call it communion, but we're stubborn, so we call it the Lord's Supper. And maybe if you're from a Catholic background or a diet Catholic background, you call it the Eucharist. Maybe you call it something like that. But we call it the Lord's Supper. And Jesus only really instituted two ceremonies. He instituted baptism, and he instituted the Lord's Supper. And he said, these are things that you're supposed to continue for a specific purpose. You realize Jesus didn't start church services. That was a tradition that came over from the disciples being Jews and going to synagogue on Saturday. They moved it to Sunday and started having a worship service. They gathered together all the time, and that's the thing that we preserved. And we think about that like that's the thing you can't miss. That's the thing you can't skip out on. But that was the thing made up by the disciples. Jesus instituted this ceremony, but we don't take it seriously. We skip out on it. Well, let me ask you, what should we value more, the thing created by Jesus or the thing that created by the disciples? Well, I want to talk to you today. I want to go through Mark chapter 14, and I want us to talk about the Lord's Supper and where it came from and why it got that way and all the things that Jesus did to help you understand why this matters, why Jesus instituted and what he wants us to do with it. So we're going to continue on through Mark 14. If you've been with us, you know that we've skipped around a little bit in Mark 14 just to make things difficult for everybody. We've skipped around a little bit of that. But we're going to jump in Mark chapter 14, verse 12. And then we're going to read through and just talk about why Jesus did the way that things the way he did. Mark chapter 14, starting in verse 12, on the first day of unleavened bread, when they sacrificed the Passover lamb, his disciples said to him, where will you go? Where will you have us go and prepare for you to eat the Passover? And he sent two of his disciples and said to them, go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he enters, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, where is my guest room where I may eat the Passover with my disciples? And he will show you a large upper room furnished and ready there prepared for us. And the disciples set out and went to the city and found it just as he had told them, and they prepared the Passover. Passover is like Thanksgiving and Christmas wrapped together. Okay? It's a thing that you don't miss. You don't miss it. Not only was it culturally something you didn't miss, it's not something you skipped, but it was required by the Old Testament law. There was actually punishment for missing it. They didn't really enforce that punishment, but there were punishments for missing this. This is a ceremony that initiated their relationship with God, and they said, this is the thing I want you to do every single year. I want you to repeat this. It came about during the time of the Exodus when they came out. This is what God told them to do right before he brought them out of Egypt. And he said, I want you to keep doing this. And so the disciples are with Jesus and they're going and they said, where are we going to do Passover? And this is a conundrum for them. Because it's not like you can just, when Brittany was a new nurse, she would have to work some holidays and we would go to the Chinese restaurant and just pick a place to go for Christmas. That's what we did. This is not one of those things because it's not just about where you celebrate it or when you celebrate it, but who you celebrate it with. Passover is a family thing. They were supposed to gather all their family together and celebrate this together. And the only time you would involve other people is if there were neighbors that were by themselves that didn't have other people to eat this with. So you've got the widow that lives next door and she doesn't have any family. So you invite her in for that. Or you've got the man that never got married down the street and you invite him for that. But this is a family ceremony. It's not something you do alone and it's not something that you do as a community. Although all the community is doing it, you celebrate this as a Passover. And so for the disciples, they're not home. Jesus has deliberately kept them away from home at this time when they're supposed to be with their families. And they're like, what are we going to do? And Jesus really institutes the first change about Passover here where he says this isn't going to be from now on, it's not going to be about your family getting together, but our family of faith being together. He says, I want you to go and I want you to find a man carrying a water jug and I want you to tell him, hey, Jesus is coming to your house for Passover. And that seems like kind of vague instructions that you would go look for a man. Like, surely there are lots of men carrying water jugs. But there wouldn't have been lots of men carrying water jugs. That is women's work, okay? And you can say that's women's work. Oh, sexism. No, they actually wanted that to be their work because this is when the women would go and get together. They would get together at the well. They would get together at the river, wherever it was. And this was women's time, that they would spend together and do whatever secret things that women do when they're alone. I don't know. This is when they would do that. And so for a man to be carrying a water jug is significant, because it meant that either the women were sick or he was a servant who was having to do something that was typically somebody else's job. So he goes out and gets water. He's having a bad day because, like, this is women's work. I'm kind of embarrassed to be seen here. All the women are giving me weird looks when I show up at the well because, they're all gossiping to themselves about things, and now I'm interrupting. And he's coming back to his house carrying a water jug, which is a symbol of him doing something he's not supposed to be doing. And the disciples see that and say, that is the indication that this is the person I'm supposed to talk to. So they go to him and they say, hey, Jesus wants to come to your house for Passover. He says, okay, let's go. And invites them in. And what that means is that this family is going to be sharing Passover with Jesus and his disciples. Now, this is a wealthy family. We know it's a wealthy family because they have an upper room. Most people don't have second rooms in their houses. Okay? You've got your main living area, and if you're middle class, then you have a second room on your house where the animals would stay separate from you. And if you're really wealthy, then you have the upper room, which is going to be like the cool dining area that you would use for when you have guests over. Most people don't have that. So this is a wealthy family. We're pretty sure that this is where Mark, the guy who wrote this gospel, lived because of some things that connected back to it in Acts. So they go to their house and they're there, and they're going to have the Passover right there. Passover is this huge holiday that they're supposed to go through every year to remind them about how God rescued them from Egypt. They were in slavery in Egypt for hundreds of years, and God sent Moses to rescue them and bring them out. This is the 10 plagues situation, right? Where he sends all the 10 plagues. And the 10th plague was the death of the firstborn. And what he was going to do is he said, I'm going to send the angel of death through town, and every firstborn, whether they're animals or humans, is going to die unless you do something to show your faith. And this act of faith was available both to Israelites and Egyptians. Anyone who did this, who believed in God, who recognized his power, was free to perform this act of faith. And this is what he said to them to do in Exodus chapter 12, verse 3. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for his household. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Now, animal sacrifice would be tough. I don't like to kill stuff. Animal sacrifice would be tough for me. But this is not just get you an animal and sacrifice it. What did he say? He said, I want you to get you an animal. I want it to be a baby animal. I want it to be cute as can possibly be. I want it to be the perfect little 4-H lamb. That's what I want. And I want you to bring it into your house for 4 days. And for 4 days, this is going to be your pet. You're going to love it. Your kids are going to play with it. They're going to want to sleep with it at night. You're going to love this animal. There were rituals that they went through, cleaning the animal's hooves, cleaning the animal's fur, taking care of it for 4 days. This sheep, this goat, this lamb was a treasured animal. It was a pet in the home. And after 4 days, everybody would kill their lambs, kill their pets at the same time. I don't think that would work for some of y'all. I don't think that would work for some of y'all. Miss Linda has a stray cat that she feeds. It's not even her cat. Some of y'all wouldn't be able to do this, but there was a point behind this. He wanted them to love this animal, to recognize the sacrifice, to make it an actual sacrifice. And when they would kill the animal, and then in verse 7, they would take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and lintels of the houses in which they eat. And they shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on a fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall eat it. So they were supposed to take the animal. They were supposed to kill the animal. They were supposed to take the blood and brush it on the doorposts of the houses. And then they were supposed to eat the animal with bitter herbs and with unleavened bread. That's what the purpose of that. Now, he adds these, he creates these elements, and these are the basic elements of Passover. It's the lamb that you love, it's bitter herbs, and it's unleavened bread. And these all things all have a purpose. The bitter herbs are supposed to represent the bitterness of slavery and how difficult it was for them to be there. The unleavened bread represents two things. It represents the fact that God rescued them quickly, so quickly that they didn't have time for the bread to rise. They had bread that had to do is just mix the dough up and throw it on the hot rock or whatever it is that they're doing, that they would cook it really quickly. And so it represented bread that had to be cooked quickly because God took a long time to begin the rescue, but when God began the rescue, he rescued them fast. But it also, leaven, yeast in the Bible represents sin. It's always used as a representation of sin. And so this was supposed to be bread that was completely without sin, to represent, if you can look ahead, something else that would come later on. And then this lamb that they loved would be given as a sacrifice, and the blood of the lamb was spread on the door, because when the angel of death came, the sign of faith that the angel was looking for was the blood of the innocent lamb that they loved spread over their household. And when he saw that, he would pass over, which is where we get the name Passover. He would pass over them. So the elements he told them to use were lamb, unleavened bread, and bitter herbs. They eventually added a bunch of other stuff, but they added two basic things. One is a brushy vegetable. He didn't require specific vegetables. He was like, hey, something bitter. And they mostly use horseradish now, but you would use something bitter and then something brushy. They would use parsley now, but you would use some kind of vegetable that you could use to symbolize the brush that spread the blood on the door. So they would eat that as a symbol of the blood. And then 4 cups of wine were used throughout the meal. And the 4 cups of wine are the outline for the whole meal. This whole meal lasts about 2 hours, okay? Depending on how long they do things. You have to have a book called the Haggadah that you read, and you go through and it tells you what to say step by step. And the children say some things, and the head of the household says some different things. But they go through, and they're supposed to have these 4 elements. And so we're going to go through what those are in just a minute. But he says in Exodus 12:24, here's what I want you to do forever. You shall observe this rite as a statute for you and your sons forever. And when you come to the land that the Lord will give you as he promised, you shall keep this service. You don't just do it now, but I want you to do it forever. And when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? You shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover. For he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians but spared our houses, and the people bowed their heads and worshiped. And Moses said, I want you to take this before it happens as a sign that you trust me to do this. And then from now on, you will continue this. And the whole point of this is so that your children say, what are we doing? Like, what is the point of this? And you will tell the story about how God rescued his people from captivity and from slavery, and how he did it through the death of an innocent lamb. They go through the Passover ceremony, and as they get into, after the second cup, I believe it is, they get into the second cup of wine, and the youngest child in the house is supposed to say, why is this night different from all the others? Why on this night do we recline to the left when all other nights we sit up or recline to the right? Why do we do this? And they go through and explain everything, and they play these roles, and they go out and explain this, and they do this every year. I've been a part of one. It was really interesting. It was more of a liberal one because it was Messianic Christians. It wasn't Orthodox Jews, but it's a really interesting ceremony to go through. But they do this every year to remember what it is that God did for them as he rescued them. Now, by the time that Jesus takes his disciples to the Last Supper, it's gotten a lot more complicated. Right? What God said to do is eat the lamb, spread the blood on the door, eat these vegetables, make unleavened bread. But even by the time we get to Deuteronomy, it's gotten more complicated. And now it's to the point that there's a whole book. So we have to figure out what it was that Jesus did. And it's somewhere in the middle of those two places. The Passover Seder, and that's what it's called Seder, which means order in Hebrew, is really long and divided into 4 sections around the 4 cups of wine. And so what they will do is they'll say specific prayers, they'll wash their hands in specific ways, they'll eat specific things. At one point, you're supposed to get some bitter vegetables, and it's supposed to get the amount that's equal to the size of an olive, which, I mean, depending on whether they're kalamatas or not, I don't know. You can have some trouble there, and they have arguments about that. But you're supposed to get it and dip it in salt water to represent the tears and all those things. But I just kind of want to give you an overview of it. The first cup is called the cup of sanctification. So what happens is the host, whoever the head of the family is, will pour the first cup of wine. That would have been Jesus in this situation. And there's this really long blessing that goes along, but I just want to read you the first sentence of it. It says, "Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, creator of the fruit of the vine." And it goes through the rest of this blessing. But right here is where we think that Jesus says to them, "I have earnestly desired to take this meal with you. But from this point, I will not take again of the fruit of the vine until I take it again with you." And he says this right now, and so from the very beginning, the disciples know something's up because Jesus is ad-libbing, and you're not supposed to ad-lib. You're not supposed to deviate. But Jesus deviates right from the very beginning after this blessing. They ritually wash their hands with a blessing, dip vegetables in salt water. They say special prayers. But then they do something that's really strange. And I want to tell you, Orthodox Jews do this. And to me, I look at this, I'm like, this is really obvious what's happening. And they don't see it at all. Okay? They take 3 pieces of matzah. This is unleavened bread. You can get this at Walmart. Okay? It's on aisle A14 at the Pleasant Grove Neighborhood Market. I had to go get it yesterday. It's made with flour and water. I like mine to be made with some salt. This tastes like an unsalted saltine. I don't know why you would ever eat those, but this is what it tastes like. And so they have 3 of them. And they take the 3 of them, and they take the middle one, and they break it. Okay? And then they're going to set the 2 unbroken pieces and the smaller piece of the broken one aside. They set it right back on the table. But then they take this one, and this is called the afikoman. It means dessert, which is a terrible dessert. But they take it, and they take this piece of bread that was broken, and they wrap it in a piece of cloth. And we don't know when the traditions around this started. What they will do now is to keep the kids engaged, because again, you're talking about a 2-hour meal. The afikoman, all the kids put their heads on the table and close their eyes, and someone will take the bread, the afikoman, and they'll hide it. And later on in the meal, when the meal's over, they will send the kids on a hunt around the house to see who can find the broken bread that was wrapped and hidden. And they bring it back, and they get a prize. If they bring it back, whoever gets it gets a prize. Sometimes they'll give everybody a prize, but they take this afikoman and they hide it, and they go from there. I'm sure you can see what we're going to get to in just a minute. So they take this bread, one of the 3 pieces, and the bread is broken and hidden, wrapped in a cloth. And then they go on to the second cup. They drink the first cup, pass it around and drink it. So they might have their own cups depending on how it is, but they're going to drink this first cup of wine. Then they go to the second cup of wine. This is the cup of plagues. And in this cup, they tell the story about how God rescued them. They tell the story of the plagues, and the host will dip his finger in the wine and sprinkle it on the plate one time for each plagues as he goes through the stories of the plagues and how God used this to rescue them. He tells the story. And then after he tells the story, they wash their hands ritually again, and they pray special blessing. But then they pass the cup around, and they drink the cup of plagues in memory of the plagues that God sent to rescue them. They say some more prayers, and this is when they have the feast. Now, the feast, they've got specific elements, but it turns into Thanksgiving, right? They got all kinds of stuff. They've got special things. They have this thing called cheroset, which is like apples and walnuts, kind of a desserty, maybe a sweet potato kind of thing that they have like we would have at Thanksgiving, and it represents the mortar of the bricks, and then they have their special family foods that they eat. But they have all these. But meanwhile, like you've got this festive meal, but meanwhile on the table during this celebration is their pet that they killed, whose blood was shed for them, and they eat of the body of the Passover sacrifice. And they eat the bitter herbs that remind them of the slavery that they were in. And they go through this whole thing, and so they've been there for about an hour now. They eat for a while until they're full. And we get to the end of this meal. And it's during this meal at this point in Mark chapter 14, verse 18, where Jesus makes his surprise announcement. He says, as they were reclining at table and eating, Jesus said, "I say to you, one of you will betray me, one who is eating with me." And they began to be sorrowful and to say to him one after another, "Is it I?" And he said to them, "It is one of the 12 who is dipping bread into the dish with me." And that's funny is that they don't dip bread usually. But part of the ceremony is dipping the bread into the wine. And what he's saying is, I'm not going to tell you who it is, but I'm going to tell you it's one of you. It's one of you who's closest to me that will betray me. And then we get to the end of the meal. Before the third cup of wine is poured, we get to the end of the meal. And they send the kids all over. Now, I don't know who it was that if they searched for it this way, if Mark was the only teenager there and he's like, I got to go look for this bread. Like, I don't want to do the little kid stuff. Maybe they didn't do that. Maybe they just set it aside. But at this point, Jesus brings out the aphikomon. And he takes this bread that is wrapped in a cloth and he unwraps it. And I don't know what that's like for Jesus. To take a piece of bread that represents himself, that's wrapped in a cloth, knowing that he will die in an excruciating way. And that his body, which was given for those that love him and that he loved, would be taken and wrapped in a cloth and hidden for 3 days. And as part of his celebration, he takes the representation of his body and unwraps it, picturing how though he would be hidden from them for 3 days, he would come back for the celebration after the sacrifice and be given to them. And this is what he says in Mark chapter 14, verse 22. And this is way off script, okay? This is borderline disrespectful for him to go off script this way. But this is what he says in Mark chapter 14, verse 22. As they were eating, he took bread and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to them and said, "Take, this is my body." So he takes one of the three that was broken and wrapped up and hidden, and he takes it and he breaks it. I'm going to have to vacuum. And he breaks it, and he says, "I want you to take this. I want you to eat this. And this is what you would normally do, but here's what I want you to know. This has always been a picture of me. Because my body will be given for your sake. Just like this lamb that we loved, that is laying on this table, was given for our sake, my body will be given for your sake. And anyone who partakes of the lamb will have their Passover and their freedom. Not slavery from Egypt, not slavery from bondage and servitude, but freedom from slavery and sin. The slavery that all of us enjoy, and all those who will recognize that God is right and that we are wrong, that we need a rescue, all those who take the blood of the Lamb and spread it over themselves. I will pass over them. He says, he took the bread and after blessing it and broke it and gave it to them, saying, "Take, this is my body." It's just shocking that Jesus would say that. Because this is supposed to represent their freedom. He says it is supposed to represent your freedom, but it's not about your freedom on earth. It's about your freedom from sin. And all of you are confused, and you think I'm here to start a new kingdom and rescue from the Romans, and you think that I'm initiating something here that's about freedom from Rome and the oppression of an oppressive government, but I'm telling you it's about a freedom from your sin, that each and every one of you have sinned, and you are in slavery to that sin, and because of that slavery, you are doomed to death and hell forever, but my body will be given. It will be broken. It will be wrapped up and hidden. And all of you who will trust me, all of you who love me, all of you who will partake of what I'm offering to you will be set free from sin. After the aphikomon is the third cup, and this cup is the cup of redemption. It's the cup where they describe the story of how God didn't just send the plagues, He didn't just release them from slavery, but He took them as His own. The cup of redemption is poured. And Jesus pours the cup of redemption. And this is what He says in Mark chapter 14, verse 23. He took a cup, and when He had given thanks, He gave it to them, and they all drank of it. And He said, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." He said, "My body is the lamb." and it will be my blood that's poured out for you. But he doesn't say, my blood is the blood that will be spread over you and pass over you. But instead, he says, this is my blood of the covenant. Luke tells us that what he said is, this is the cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant. Now, new covenant is an interesting phrase because it only occurs one time in the Old Testament. One time in the Old Testament does the phrase new covenant occur. See, their agreement with God was called a covenant, and their covenant with God was that he would be their God and they would be his people. He would take care of them. Here were the rules that they were supposed to follow, and if they didn't follow those, they had to offer sacrifices to get forgiveness, and this is how it was supposed to work. But Jeremiah says there is coming a day. Let's just read it here real fast. Jeremiah chapter 31, he says, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make in the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. There is coming a new covenant that is not the covenant of doing the best you can and offering sacrifices to make up a difference, but a new covenant where God would dwell within his people. And he would write his law on their hearts, and he would forgive their sin and would not remember it anymore. There would not be a need for constant sacrifices for forgiveness of sin. But one sacrifice would be enough for everyone forever. The covenants are always sealed in blood. You can make a promise to each other. You can have a handshake agreement, but a covenant is a bigger deal. It's a big deal. When God made a covenant with Abraham, if you remember that when we talked about that last year sometime, he killed 3 animals and he spread them out, and the blood of those sacrifices was what sealed that covenant. Sealed in blood. And Jesus said there is a new covenant that is coming, and it will be sealed with blood like all the others, but it will be sealed with my blood. The covenant that makes it possible for you not to receive temporary forgiveness from moment to moment, but that will make it possible for your sins to be taken as far as the east is from the west. And my blood will be poured out for this covenant. This has to be a moment that stands out to them because he references a prophecy in Jeremiah that only shows up one time. He's way off book. I'm sure he is crying at this point because of what he's about to go through and what he's doing for them. The lamb that they love, that they have walked with, that they have been with, offering his broken body for them, offering his blood for them. But he pours this third covenant. He initiates this third cup. He initiates this new ritual for them to follow. And this is the ritual that we follow now. We don't do the whole Passover. Some people still do that. But early on, the churches said, you know what, we're not all Jewish. We don't all need to do this. What we need to do is this one part that Jesus instituted. And so this is what we celebrate now, the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine. But Jesus wasn't done. Because after the third cup is poured, after the cup of redemption where they tell of God not just freeing them, but making them his own, the fourth cup is poured. And this cup is called the halal cup. It's the cup of praise. And after they pour this cup, they sing Psalms 113 through 118. And I would love to read all of those Psalms for you, but I don't think that would work out very well. They sing Psalms 113 through 118. And I just want to tell you a little bit from Psalm 118. Psalm 118 is a psalm of praise, but it's where we get the reference to the cornerstone that was rejected, being the foundation for the new agreement with God. And they sing these songs. Mark chapter 14:26 says that they did this. When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. They poured this cup. They sing the songs of praise. They share the cup amongst themselves. And after that's over, Jesus goes out to be arrested, to be beaten, to be tried, to be betrayed, to be executed. The Lamb that had been with them not for 4 days, but for 3 years, that they loved and that loved them, was given up for their sake. His body was broken as the prophets foretold. He was wrapped in cloths, buried in a borrowed tomb. And after 3 days, rescue from sin, raised up from the death. Not just forgiveness, but forgiveness and redemption. Forgiveness and introduction into the family of God was given to them. And the thing is, they had been practicing this ceremony for hundreds of years. And they didn't get it. And they still practice it today. And they don't get it. But they still practice it. Now here's the problem. We have taken this thing and we've turned it into Granny's lemonade pitcher. Yeah, it meant something to Mom and Dad, so I'm going to be there, but I don't really understand the point of this. I don't understand why I'm doing it. So we decide that it doesn't mean anything. It's not worth celebrating. Or we take it and we say, you know what, because I know it means something, but I don't know what it means. I'm just going to do whatever I want to with it. And it's really, really sweet when you see a couple partake of communion as part of a wedding. It's sweet, but it's wrong. Because that's not what this is for. Whenever God told Moses to set this up, he said, this is supposed to be about your family. Remembering together. This is an opportunity for you to teach, to disciple, to raise up your children to understand this. And when Jesus took it, he said, okay, before this has been about your family, all those who are a part of Israel, but this sacrifice is not for all those that are a part of Israel. It's for everyone who will trust in me. So now this sacrifice now, this ceremony now is not about your family at home, and it's not about you individually, but it's about your family of faith participating in this together. He says, I want you to continue this. He says, do this. And when you do this, remember me. And we remember church. We remember to show up on Sundays. Remember to go to fellowship. We remember to go to potluck. But when was the last time that you celebrated this the way that God intended you to? He gave us 2 ordinances. Call them ordinances. We shouldn't use that word because nobody knows what that means. He gave us 2 ceremonies to perform. The first is baptism after you believe. After you've declared your faith, you publicly declare what has taken place inside of you through baptism. We symbolize the death, the burial, and the resurrection through baptism. And then we come together as a church family to celebrate what was done for us, the Lamb that we love, given for our sake. So, I just want to tell you a few things. First of all, this ceremony was given to us to be repeated continually as a reminder and an opportunity to teach. And we are in disobedience if we don't do that. Second thing I want to tell you is that this is to be taken very seriously. Paul teaches about this a lot. He talks to the Corinthians, and what they were doing is they turned it into a big potluck. And there were lots of other problems that were going on. And he said they weren't taking it seriously at all. This was just a time for them to get together and hang out. And it came with all sorts of other problems. But he said, people are dying because of this. He said people are showing up and they're not taking it seriously. They're not dealing with their sin. They're eating of it unworthily. And he said, you got to stop that because people have died from this. God has killed people for their attitude that they take whenever they come and they take the Lord's Supper. So you need to take it seriously. And so we try to take it seriously. The way that we take it seriously is we use unleavened bread. It's not the best bread I've ever had. It doesn't taste good. I would not want to eat it on a regular basis. But we do this as a symbol of the sinless body of Jesus. We take it seriously. This is the one where maybe we don't do everything right. But we don't take wine like they did. We take pre-wine because we're Baptists. We don't use purple drink. We use pure grape juice. That if you put it in the closet a couple months, I guess it would be wine at that point. But we take that grape juice. The fruit of the vine, and we use only that. But the third thing that we do that we really take it seriously is a little bit differently than some other churches do. And that is that the way that we obey the 2 commands that Paul gave us about considering our own sin before we take this, we do that differently. We're given 2 commands. First of all is that we're supposed to consider our own selves. We're supposed to consider, am I in a position where I really need to be celebrating this right now? Am I in a position where I've dealt with my sin, or am I just messing around right now? And if I'm just messing around right now, if I've got the wrong attitude about this, I need to withdraw from it. But the second thing that Paul tells us, and he's not really talking about the Lord's Supper when he says this, but he says, if anybody is in open sin, you should not even eat with that person. And we look at that and we say, okay, we shouldn't have a meal with them if we shouldn't go to Moe's with them. We definitely should not be taking the Lord's Supper with them if they are in open sin. So we look at that and say, we have a responsibility not just to hold ourselves accountable, but to hold one another accountable. So the way that we take those commands seriously is by saying that if you have committed to be held accountable to us, held accountable by us, and for you to hold us accountable as well, if we've engaged in that mutual accountability by you committing to this church through membership, then we take that together. This is our family of faith. That we touch the pitcher to connect right back to the disciples where they were as they gathered together with their family of faith. And that's what we do. You say, well, I don't like that because I'm not a member here and I want to participate in that. Well, let me tell you something. I get it. And there's a possibility that we may get to heaven and God says, you took that too seriously. You went too far with those commands. There's a distinct possibility. But I would rather God say to me, you took my commands too seriously, than for him to say, you knew that this was a possibility and did nothing about it. And that's where we're going to stand. I love you. I'm glad you're here. If you're not a member of this church, I ain't mad at you about that. You need to take some time and figure it out before you make a commitment. But before Brittany and I got married, there were some things that I really wanted to do that I was not allowed to do. But once we got married, those restrictions were removed. And if you're just dating this church, I love you. I'm glad you're here. Hope you figure it out soon. We want you in this. That's great. I'm not mad at you about that. But until you buy the cow, until you make a commitment, we're going to wait. And I want you to make that commitment. Because this is the thing that you are supposed to participate in. This is the thing that Jesus gave you to do, to remember that. This is the thing you're supposed to be a part of it. So take your time. Figure out where you're supposed to be. But when you figure it out, get on the team because you're supposed to be doing this. Let's go. Let's do it. If you have never understood this before and have sinned in the taking of the Lord's Supper, why don't you make things right with God and repent of that? It was in ignorance. Repent and make it right. If you are a member of this church, you've said, we can count on you. You will hold us accountable. You will be held accountable by us. But you don't take this ceremony seriously and you've not been a part of it. Maybe you didn't get it. You didn't understand the value of the picture, whichever one of those words you want to use. You didn't understand the value of it. I get that. But ask for forgiveness because you were supposed to be a part of this. And be here when we do this again. We will be doing this again next Sunday at 5 o'clock. Our church will. And if you just got here, you're just figuring it out, please don't rush into membership with us because of this. Take the time to make that commitment. But if you've been putting this thing off because you like dating better than being married, understand. It's time for you to step up. Schedule a time to talk to me this week. We'll get everything worked out. You can join this church next week and we'll be a part of it. But the third thing I want to say to you is if you are reading this, you are hearing this ceremony and you are recognizing for the first time the sacrifice that was made for you, that there is no blood over your house, there is no blood over your doorpost, that you are standing before God and you will stand before God because on behalf of your own sins, on your own merit. Understand this. Lots of good people died in Egypt when the angel of death passed over. Lots of people that you would be friends with died when the angel of death passed over. Because what matters is not your effort, because your effort, no matter how great it is not enough. It will not take back the sins that you've committed in the past. Your effort is not enough. But what is enough is the blood of Jesus spread over your house and yourself. And if you will cry out to Him, He is ready right now, to share His body and blood with you. So that when the angel of death comes, your answer is that I am covered in the blood of the Lamb. The Lamb that I love, that loved me, that gave Himself up, that was broken, that was hidden and brought back in celebration. And you were covered in the blood of the Lamb. That is available to you right now, if you will accept what He's offering you. Would you stand with me? Our Heavenly Father, we come before You right now, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity You've given us to gather together and worship. I'm so grateful for the sacrifice that was made on our behalf, that You didn't just come and have no relationship with us, but like the Lamb was in the house for 4 days, You came and dwelt among us so that we might know You and be known by You, that You might experience our temptation, that You might experience the brokenness of this world. You might experience that, and despite experiencing it, have compassion on us and offer Your body and blood. And I ask if there's anyone here that has not accepted that gift, that they would accept it today. I ask if there's anyone here that You've been leading to make a commitment to this church that has chosen not to because they like dating better than marriage. Lord, I ask that You would impress upon them that You want them to be a part of this body. Not just to show up sometimes, but to be committed and be relied upon. And Lord, I ask that when we take this ceremony, when we engage in this ceremony next week, that we have our full body here. That it wouldn't just be those who don't mind showing up or think that it's important but don't really get why, but that we would all recognize that of all the things we do as the church, these two things are the two instituted by You. This is how You asked us to remember You. This is the lemonade pitcher that You have given us to put our hands on and have that connection across time and space back to those first disciples and every other believer that has come since then, Lord. Help us to take it seriously as You would have us to. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.